Welcome everybody to another episode of the Pierce Brothers. Today we're doing our most overrated guns. So stay tuned for some real shockers. Before we get going, we're trying hard to grow the channel, so make sure to like, share, subscribe, all of that. If you've subscribed and you want to help support us, click the join button. We do a monthly live chat with our VIP members, and then all members get early access to videos. We're also planning some member-only videos, so go check those out as they release. And those will remain member-only for quite some time. But yeah, also go check out Teton Custom Holsters, link in the description to get yourself a holster. Use code PierceBros to get a discount. So with that, we're going to dive right in. Porter, you go first.
All right. Well, this is going to be one of the most controversial ones here, I think. Maybe Dad's over there, maybe, but I think mine's probably going to be more controversial than Dad's. But my most overrated rifle, or just gun in general, is an AR-15. I love them. Shoot them all the time. Just, I don't really have too many bad things to say about them, okay? So let's just get that cleared off before everyone dives into the comment section and is like, what an idiot,
Well, anyway, that's what I'm thinking. You better explain it well.
One of the most overrated guns from the standpoint of, like, the end-of-the-world survival scenarios. Everybody in those, I gotta have an AR-15 and everything, and it's like, no. A bolt gun is way more handy in an end-of-the-world survival situation than a AR-15. AR-15, it's way too easy
I disagree.
Well, I mean, okay, it's one thing if you're inner city, like a metropolis-type city, and
like 90% of the USA.
Well, yeah. Okay, that's one scenario. But for where I live out here in the country, a bolt gun is way more useful and everything else than what a AR-15 is ever going to be useful for, especially where if you're really into the world, okay, you don't have access to cars and vehicles, you're going to be probably more or less on foot or on horseback. You're pretty much two options there. Maybe an old truck that doesn't have too many electronics on it or something, but anyway, I digress. Anyways, so on a horse, I hate carrying AR-15s. On and even hiking and stuff, they're just kind of awkward. They're kind of bulky. Yeah, you can put on a smaller mag, a 10-round mag, but then it kind of defeats the purpose of the AR-15 for just sheer firepower and stuff. So
I might interject. It takes about a 40 gun safe to fit 10 ARs in there.
Anyways, but a good bolt gun with a sleek scope, not one of those great big, 56 millimeter lenses, objective and everything. It's like, if you have a sleek scope or even iron sights on a bolt gun, or even a lever gun, it's just so much more handy. That's my personal thoughts, but I'm probably an idiot for saying it, but
End of the world disagree, but move on to Jake.
End of the world, I'm not going to have an AR-15. Let's just say that. Okay, so for my two choices, I'll just do one now. I don't own any of these guns anymore because, quite frankly, they're not very good. So they're overrated, and so I sold them, But my first pick would be the Walther PPK. I know I've already mentioned that one before. I've said that one at least 2 or 3 times, but
I agree with this one.
I own probably 10 of them every generation, from pre-war German, West German, Inner Arms, Smith & Wesson, and the new current production guns. About 50% of the time you'll get a gun that works good. The other 50% of the time, you'll get a gun that just has all types of issues. So
just shit.
Yeah, feeding issues, failures to eject, failures to fire, magazines falling out of the gun randomly, and just all types of issues. So, yeah, the only reason that gun's still in production today that gun should have died probably 50 years ago. Is because of James Bond.
James Bond.
007. And then everybody,
the fanboys that have to have the James Bond guns.
one of the James Bond movies, he shoots down a helicopter with his PPK, and I'm like, I think that was like, that was only like 2 movies ago at the end of it.
movies.
And I'm like, okay, that's really believable.
That's very realistic.
Well, what's
Can't see
funny
either
about
of
this, Jake,
best-
is how many times have you seen vintage Walther PPKs or PPKs, whatever, new in the box, high polish, and the owners are taking huge pride in them. Like, look at this piece. Our guns are all beat up and worn, and not beat up, but worn, holster worn and used. And so a lot of owners of PPKs, by my experience, just collect them.
Yeah.
Well, strictly a collector item.
Yeah.
They're they're one of the most handsome semi-auto pistols ever made. They're just a very good-looking handgun. But that's about where it begins and ends with for it, in my opinion. You know, like,
I agree.
nowadays for a defensive handgun, there's a million different choices that are a better gun. They might have been a good cherry gun if you had one that worked 60 years ago, but not so much today.
Today there's way better guns.
Yeah. So, anyways, on to Joe.
All right. This one also will probably make a lot of people mad since it's the second most popular handgun in the world. Right, America. The Sig P320. It's
Blow your balls off.
not only that, they have the spongiest trigger of any striker fired gun on the market. You squeeze and it's just like a sponge. Anyways, terrible. I cannot stand the trigger on them. It's
And they're
light and
ugly.
crisp. But yeah, they
They
just
look
pretty ugly.
awful.
So
They look worse than a Glock.
They look like the type of gun I would have drawn as a kid with my stick guys having stick guns, you know?
at least they have a better grip angle than Glock.
Yeah.
But that's about where it ends for me. I've owned 3 of them, and I just can never like them. That trigger is just too much of a sponge. And there's the other point that Porter mentioned, just random detonations, legs getting blown off, and
Some cop got his balls blown off. Well, and people will sit there and argue that point. It's still a hotly debated topic
It's
if
hugely
it's actually
debated.
happening
Yeah,
or not. There's certainly seems to be videos out there of it happening. So,
Well,
certainly seems to be.
I was
Yeah.
hired as an expert witness in a case where a guy had an accidental discharge of one and hit himself in the hand. His gun had been upgraded with the trigger, the new trigger system, but and I worked with that gun for a couple months, and I never could get it to fail or to have an accidental discharge being dropped very scientifically in different positions and so forth. I never could get it jar loose. Doesn't mean it didn't. I just couldn't get it to do it in that particular case. But in my opinion, Sig shot themselves in the foot on that gun. Pun certainly intended, is that the military did not like the original trigger, and they required them to upgrade the trigger system, but they took the old trigger system and put them in civilian guns. And that was a big mistake. They should have never done that.
Yeah.
So,
All right, Dad. What's your first choice?
well, I'm going to tick a lot of people off right off the bat. Here's a Remington 700. This was chambered in 300 Remington Ultra Magnum. This was a vintage gun, one of the very first 300 Ultra Mags ever made. But don't know where to start on Remington 700s. There's millions of them out there.
Literally.
They were a modern gun in the sense that they were manufactured to be less costly than the competing guns of the time.
Fast and easy.
Remington actually took technology that they had either learned during World War II or other places at the time, and they went to a round receiver, so it's round bar stock. I think it started out at about 64 ounces and before milling, and anyway, it was very easy for them to mill and machine that receiver. It saved them a ton of money compared to the Winchester, but of course the barrel was rifled in a new method, if you will, much less costly. They eliminated a lot of issues on this to keep costs down, but and this dog is driving me crazy. She hasn't seen me in 3 days. Anyway, but here's the upshot. I've got a lot of Remington 700s. I've used them in a lot of testing and development of loads and cartridges and so forth. One problem, and also, you know, with gunsmithing experience and so forth, one problem that is very common with them is the broken squat. Knock it off. Or your dog. Is they have a little metal clip. Squat. They have a little metal clip inside the bolt face, inside the countersunk bolt face. And they are prone to wearing in varmint rifles. When you shoot thousands and thousands of rounds, eventually they're going to eventually break, or they can even break when they're put under any kind of a stress or whatever on larger caliber. I've had to replace many extractors on Remington 700s. They're a good rifle. They're accurate. A lot of people really like them, but I just think they're overrated. My opinion.
They work good as like a varmint rifle from the standpoint of they're really accurate. They're reliable from that standpoint, but if you're really going to use them heavy and hard and in bad environments, they're just not the way to go.
Yep, you're right. The House trigger, I've actually been on wilderness hunts in Canada and Alaska when I've seen those where gunk or rust or debris gets in them and they just quit right now. So there's nothing you can do to make that action stay calm. So they're really not the best rugged wilderness rifle. In the lower 48, people rarely subject their rifles to that kind of stuff. Some ranchers I know do, because they'll rest in the pickup truck, you know, dust all the time, whatever, and that'll eventually get that trigger group. But they were bad about that. And of course, and one thing, I don't want to bring up a sore subject for Remington, but of course that trigger mechanism ultimately cost them untold millions in lawsuits. And
well, and you know, that's why a lot of people will buy a Remington 700. The first thing they do is switch out to a Timney trigger.
Most people don't.
Well, a lot of them that are the real users.
Some do, but most don't. So and Remington's upgraded the trigger with the current models, granted. But Mike Walker, one of the founders, or one of the prime drivers in that Remington at the time in developing that rifle, he really wanted to change that trigger group before they went into production, and the accountants, the penny counters, they wouldn't let him, and it was literally only going to cost a few cents more to upgrade that trigger system. But sad note, because that ultimately really sent Remington into a spiral, that the financial spiral, downward spiral that they never really recovered from. But it's a good rifle, but they're just often overrated. People that don't have great extensive experience with them, they think, well, mine works fine. Well, yeah, but do you put thousands of rounds of proof loads through them every year, or test loads? No.
Yeah.
I've got many 700s. I've used them a lot as test rifles. So I've developed loads and ammo for more than 300 different cartridges. So if that gives you an idea. But anyway, back to you, Porter.
I only thought we were doing one apiece, so.
Jake had two. I know.
Well, I've gone to two more I can mention real quick. First, my friend Eli Duckworth told me to make an honorable mention of the Bren 10. I've never owned one of those or shot one or handled one, so I can't really comment on that, but I've heard horror stories about them. So we'll throw that one out there for Porter's number 2, the Bren 10.
The Bren 10. They were awful. They were awful. I can't brought after you buy the pistol, you had to wait 6 months or a year to get a magazine. That's no joke.
And then hope it worked.
And then hope it worked. They were not a great gun. And yet I guess they're really going through the roof from a collector standpoint.
Yeah, they are. That's because it's a Bren 10.
I don't know.
It's a cool concept.
I don't get it.
It was a cool concept that failed, you know? That's all it was. So for my number 2 gun is the German STG-44. Again, I don't have my original one I used to have, but Joe's got this 22 version, so I thought it would be kind of a stand-in.
Which has actually been ultra reliable.
It's been extremely reliable, especially
unlike the...
Yeah. So, what prompted me to start thinking about this, and actually the whole video idea, was again, my friend Eli on Instagram. He's got a big Instagram account on there, but he does a question and answer thing, and I asked him the question, STG-44 or M1 carbine, and he answered and said the STG-44 looks good on paper, but I would still pick an M1 carbine. And I was thinking about it, and I'm like, there's actually a lot of sense to what he said, because the STG-44, it's big and heavy, 10.5 or 11 pounds or something is what the originals weigh. The cartridge they shoot is 8mm Kurtz, which is pushing a 123 grain bullet at around 2250 or so. The M1 carbine, on the other hand, weighs 5 pounds, so literally about half the weight, and it's shooting a 110 grain bullet at right around 2,000 feet a second. So not quite as
Not far off.
not far off, and they're both,
Far off, but
pretty
half
similar.
the weight.
Yeah, half the weight, and you get a better, more reliable rifle.
If you're
frankly,
not hiking hard, like that extra 5 or 6 pounds, it makes
it
a
matters.
big
Well,
If
difference.
you're, in a, if you're in a firefight and war, that extra weight adds a lot.
Quit
Look
handling.
at like the modern day with the new Sig Spear
oh yeah, heavy.
versus the M4.
Yeah.
I mean, extremely heavy, way more recoil. You'll get battle fatigue by trying to tilt that thing around
Yeah.
all day in a battle.
Yeah.
Like you'll be exhausted by the end of the fight.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
and-
it's different in today's war than World War II. World War II, that was a
dirty,
rough. I
yeah.
mean, what you had is what you had to live with.
Yeah. So, STG 44. So again, really kind of the father of the modern assault rifle, and I think that's why people love it so much. But by the same token, hardly anybody in the U.S. has ever had any experience with them. They may have shot one on a full auto range or something one time, but that's pretty much the extent of most people's experience with them. I owned one and put a few hundred rounds through it, and it wasn't wasn't all it was hyped up to be. Let's just put it
Wasn't
that
as
way.
cool as you thought.
Yeah, like when you gotta consider also when these things were being made in Germany, the war was really starting to hit Germany hard, and so their quality of guns that they were putting out were actually pretty awful. They were really poor materials, roughly made, roughly machined, and certain rifles actually, like take the German G43 for instance, those were intentionally overgassed so they would work well on the Eastern Front, and the Germans knew that the gun would literally beat itself to death within 1,000 rounds, and yet the life expectancy of the rifle and combat conditions was such that it would never meet the 1,000 round anyways, So if you ever get an original Gewehr 43, make sure you buy one of the shooter kits before you shoot it. Otherwise, you're very likely gonna crack the receiver or otherwise damage the rifle. But the same thing kind of applies to the STG 44. They're just roughly made, not all that reliable. I know Mike Venerino, the gun writer, had an original select fire gun. Mine was just a parts kit build, so mostly matching parts, and put together by a very reputable builder, but they just don't work all that well. I know Mike's, he would download the magazines to like 28 rounds out of 35, so download them at least 7 rounds to try to get the gun to function better, and his ran fairly well, but again, you would just expect to have some malfunctions every now and then. And the M1 carbine, on the other hand, you had a rifle that
was pretty flawless.
yeah, I mean, they've
Yeah, they
certainly,
went pretty good.
yeah, especially a new production gun, during the time. One that had shot through 5 or 6 barrels by the time we get them now, they work pretty darn good. So,
Yeah, and I'll throw in the cheap shot. Ruger makes a Blackhawks
yeah,
for 30 carbine.
yeah. So it just, I don't know. Again, it might piss off a lot of people that are into World War II firearms and stuff. They think the STG 44 is like the pinnacle of World War II firearms, and I'm here to tell you, it really isn't all it's cracked up to be. It certainly inspired a whole generation of modern weapons,
And it's cool.
and it's cool. It really is cool, but that's kind of where it all ends, in my opinion. So
From an actual everyday use, it just
Yeah.
isn't as
Yeah.
as what they think.
yeah, exactly. So
Yep. All right, Dad.
All
What's
right.
your last one?
All right, now I'm really on a roll to tick people off. I've got here a Colt Python. This is one of the original, I don't remember what year this was made, probably 68 or something. I've had this thing for many, many decades, actually. It's just a 4-inch 357, pretty straight up gun. I'm not saying the Python's not a good gun. It really is a good gun. But
It's overrated.
it is overrated. I mean, clean ones today, are
Just
bringing,
because of
3,500 probably.
The Walking Dead, that TV
Yeah.
show.
yeah, that's yeah.
A clean one's probably bringing 3,500, I'm guessing. And I just don't see the value there. I'm sorry. They were a good gun in the day. I bought my first one in the mid 70s, and they were very stylish looking, very handsome. But I see a new generation that's oohing and on over the Python, primarily because of its looks. And I mean, it had nice action, but as almost any world-class double action shooter will tell you, the Smith & Wesson's a better action. And for double action work, it absolutely is. These are, of course, based off the old Colt Officers Model Series. Great gun, but sorry, I don't see 3500 in them, which makes them overrated. And years ago, I took out literally probably 8 or 10 different 357 Magnum revolvers, and the Python was always renowned for its accuracy. And it's a very accurate gun, but it kind of landed in the middle of the road to trying, I don't remember now, but many different loads through those 8 or 10 different guns. Actually, the one that won that contest, hands down, over Smith & Wesson, Colt, Ruger, everybody, was a Dan Wesson. And which old silhouette shooters are like, yep. They were hard to beat on the silhouette range. Today, probably the most accurate to Freedom Arms with line boring and so forth. But the Python, great gun. I've hunted with them. I've used them. I've shot them. I like them. But they're just overrated. Bottom line.
Yep. Well, stay tuned. Yeah, stay tuned. We have our most underrated guns coming out next week or the week after. So watch for that one coming out. It's going to be a good one as well. Like we said, like, share, subscribe. Let us know what your thoughts are. What is your most overrated gun that you think is out there? So thanks, and we'll see you next time.